Hey everyone, thanks for joining Law for Doctors today. We're going to be talking about an issue that I find personally fascinating and interesting. It's something that as healthcare providers we sometimes want to ignore and try and forget about, but it affects everyone, not just healthcare providers, individuals, small businesses, large businesses. And what the issue is cyber attacks and data security. I'm sure everyone's heard of Target. As we know, they've lost a lot of money and a lot of, I think, goodwill in the community by having a data breach that impacted them. So today I have with me Matt Engle from Cragin Pike Insurance, and we're going to be discussing some of these cybersecurity issues and risks that are facing everyone, including healthcare providers, today. So Matt, why don't you just share with us how you got involved in the cybersecurity, and I think you have a good story to share.
Yeah, sure. So prior to getting involved with insurance, I spent a number of years in voice data and fiber optic cabling. So I was in the data connectivity world. So I had a bit of a tech background, and it always interested me, new technology. I'm a new person in the commercial insurance world, and I'm dealing with one of my new clients, and I recommend cyber liability insurance. So in the event your data is compromised, there's an insurance policy you can buy that will help pay for some of those expenses you'll incur. She didn't take it. About 6 months later, I get a phone call, and she gets me on the phone and says, Matt, you're not going to believe this. I've been on the phone the last 2 days with the FBI and the Secret Service. My system was hacked by the Russian mafia. This is a real story. This particular business owner has multiple restaurants in our Southern Nevada area, and she was compromised. And they were looking at her and telling her what she needed to do to keep her doors open and still be able to take credit cards. And this is the Secret Service, and then Visa and MasterCard became involved because it was a credit card fraud through their point of sale system. At that point, it cost her tens of thousands of dollars to get everything back and running, which she had no insurance coverage for. And at that point, I put together a seminar, and this is about 4 years ago now, on cybersecurity, what you need to do to help keep your data safe, and in the event you are breached, here's some suggestions for you. Right.
And that's something, from just a regular business standpoint, everyone is subject to having these types of security issues and data problems. In healthcare specifically, as everyone knows, there's the HIPAA laws, which say that you have to keep your patient information secure. And if you have your patient information somewhere like on your computers on a hard drive in the cloud, somewhere like that, it's all there. And as everyone knows in the healthcare world, if you have a problem with that, if someone hacks in and gets the information, or you lose it, or it's not safe, it's not secure, the government can come after you and fine you big money, and your patients or whoever's data you've lost are going to end up suing you. So it's a real problem. And just kind of going along with your story, I actually met with a client once, this was about a year ago, who I was talking about HIPAA, and I said, what are you guys doing for HIPAA? They said, well, we're not doing anything. Oh, okay, well, do you have a HIPAA security officer? No, we don't. Like, oh, well, are you planning on complying and trying to work with it? It's like, no, I think we'll be fine. We're a small enough operation that I don't think we really need to worry about it. But as we were discussing before the show, sometimes it's those smaller operations that are targeted because they don't have systems in place.
That's true, and I'll give you another real-life example here, because healthcare is subject to very strict compliance through HIPAA, and there are a number of things you've got to stay in compliance with, and one of them is keeping the PHI safe, the protected health information for the patients of all the medical facilities. Well, there are some pretty steep fines. If your data is compromised, those data breaches start at $50,000 if you didn't put the right things in place to keep their data safe. Right. And that happened to a hospice per breach. So that happened to a hospice in Idaho, healthcare world, and they were deemed to not have the right things in place, and they weren't HIPAA compliant, call it. So they were issued a $50,000 fine, and that's a pretty big. The fines with HIPAA started at $50,000 for data breaches. My client, those fines started at $5,000. She was subject to the PCI, the payment card industry, because she took payments with a credit card. So HIPAA in healthcare, much more strict.
Right. And I think I heard of that one you're talking about in Idaho. Was it like a year ago or so?
Yeah, it's not that long ago, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, right. And I know the big thing with that one, and I think I know I did a blog about it because it's kind of noteworthy. It was one of the first cases where the government fined a smaller healthcare organization with a smaller number of breaches for a smaller dollar amount. So, that was one that kind of got people's attention because before they were only going after kind of the big major players and big breaches, but this was one, smaller. So people kind of took it as they're sending a message to start getting things in order.
No, you're exactly right. It was a big deal, and interesting, and boy, it sends shockwaves. And that was only 420 data breaches. I say only. That's the health HHS.gov. They have if a medical facility has a breach of more than 500, subject to their rules and regulations of HIPAA, they must post it on this HHS.gov website for the whole world to see. They call it the Wall of Shame.
Yeah, and we were just before the show, I know you had brought a newspaper clip of someone that had to post their notice that there was a breach, and so that people can go and see, well, were my records compromised, and that's in the newspaper for everyone to see that, hey, we screwed up. So
yeah, 4.5 million records on that one. That was Community Health. I believe they're out of Alabama. And in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, they had a data breach notification article on if you know of anything, or if your data's been compromised, or you have any information on this, here's who you can call. And oh, by the way, we're going to now be monitoring everybody's credit who was compromised in this whole data breach. It's a pretty big deal. That Community Health, 4.5 million, they were given a lawsuit just this week, class action lawsuit from people whose data was breached. So that one's probably going to get a little messy.
Right. And I know as an attorney, I get calls from people because I advertise healthcare on my website, so they'll find my website and say, well, I had a doctor and he violated HIPAA, because everyone thinks HIPAA is violated every time something happens. So hey, I had a doctor violate HIPAA and I want to sue him. Will you help me sue him? And I don't do that. But under HIPAA, no, you can't. But there are other laws, and people are getting more aggressive, saying I can't sue you under HIPAA, but there are common law privacy rights or statutory privacy rights that I can bring in and use HIPAA to show you've fallen below the standard of care because this is what is required of you and you didn't do it. So it's always a concern when you're dealing with data. If you don't have things in place to keep it safe, you're setting yourself up for a sucky situation, basically. You're never too small to ignore it.
That's true, and you mentioned it earlier, the smaller firms are easier for the hackers to break into because they don't have the big budget for IT security. So they're targets. You don't always hear about those because those are the smaller private firms as opposed to the large Community Health, the targets that we talked about, all those other ones. So, but yeah, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you're a target.
Yeah. I know you wanted to share with us some of the things that healthcare entities or really any business can do to make sure that they're protecting themselves to avoid having these problems with their data.
Yeah, I talk about the 3 T's to minimize your risk, and train, talk, and test. So train, the first T in that, if you're a business operation, medical facility, train your employees. So many times the pathway into a data network to steal that information is through an employee who doesn't even know they did anything wrong. Their password may not have been changed in the last 6 years, and it was compromised. That's all a criminal is going to need to get into a data network lots of times. So training the employees and that on security awareness, and that's ongoing. It can't be just when you hire them and then you're done. It's something that needs to be ongoing and constantly reminded of. Changing the passwords and effective passwords is a very big deal.
Yeah, in fact, I remember I was listening to NPR, and I mentioned this before the show, like 2-3 weeks ago, and they had a guy on who was talking about hackers and what they do and why they do it. And one thing that that the person on NPR mentioned was that you could never be ahead of the hackers. We're always going to be one step behind. So if you're not actively monitoring and seeing what's going on with data and security and what are the best practices, chances are you're falling pretty far behind what people who are trying to get your data are doing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the second T, just briefly, would train, talk, and tech. The talking part is big because a lot of CEOs or owners or physicians, they don't necessarily talk to their people about their IT security. They may not get it themselves. They say, well, I've got an IT person that deals with that, or I hire a company and they deal with that. My suggestion is to get comfortable talking about it. Talk to your IT provider, whether it's an internal person or an outside firm. Talk to them about what security is in place. Talk to your attorney about what do your agreements, what do your contracts look like between you and the third-party contractor you may have coming and controlling your air conditioning, like Target. The reason Target was hacked and the reason the criminals got in was through the HVAC contractor who had access to their data network to control the temperature in their stores. It wasn't even Target. So I'm not sure what that contract looked like between Target and that third-party contractor. I always recommend it's a good idea to speak to an attorney about what those agreements look like.
Right.
And just getting comfortable talking about it. And the last one is test. Test your system. So once you've got everything in place, test it. And that needs to be ongoing because the firewalls and the security you put in place today, you can pretty much bet they'll probably be outdated next year.
Right, for sure. And just go along with number 2, talking, and you mentioned you're having an attorney look at these agreements or the arrangements you have with your contractors, is that the HIPAA law, since privacy is a big issue with HIPAA, it actually requires when a healthcare provider is getting a contractor involved that's going to have access to their health information, that they have something called a business associate agreement. And it's kind of a form agreement, but in there is a space where you get to basically go in and decide how much access the contractor is going to have, what they can access it for, and those are the types of conversations. Like for sure, like if you're Target, you should have had that conversation with your contractor. Do you need my credit card information? Do you need even access to that system? Those types of things, those questions are the ones that you should definitely be asking so you can avoid having these breaches as much as possible.
Very good point. Very good point.
And as far as just one question I would have for testing, is there a way that you can test to see if your system is good or bad, like today?
Yes. What I suggest is you go to a third-party IT firm to do the IT security test or the assessment of what you've got. Have them try and hack in. And do it outside your organization. I mean, certainly you can have internal people test it and do all those things that they do internally. It's not a bad idea to get an IT security audit done or an assessment of some sort from an outside firm and ask them to try and hack in.
Right.
And they can run assessment tools on your system too, and they'll come and talk to your people about how you do the passwords. And there's a lot of value, I think, sometimes in bringing in an outside third-party firm to test those things.
It's like a secret shopper situation.
Yes.
For the online.
Yes. Good analogy.
Yeah. So you've done everything you can to try and avoid having a data breach or a cyber security problem. How does your company, Cragin and Pike, step in if you've done all those things and something still goes wrong?
Well, I'm in the commercial insurance industry, and within the last 10 or 15 years, there has been a relatively new insurance product created called cyber liability insurance. And it was built to fill the gap of when damages are done to a company through a data breach, and their general liability coverage form doesn't cover it. So take my client, for example. Suffered a loss where she had to pay numerous fines, hire a company for 12 months by the guidelines of PCI and the Visa and MasterCard and the banking industry in order to keep her doors open to taking credit cards. She had incurred a lot of costs with that. There's an insurance policy now that will help pay for that stuff. So at Cragin & Pike, first off, what we try to do is work with people on the front end, risk management. What are you doing? The stuff we've kind of talked about.
Yeah, to avoid the problem.
Yeah, and then secondly, what's your response plan look like? Data breach response plans, which HIPAA, by the way, is now requiring that as part of the compliance, have a data breach response plan. So a lot of people think about disaster recovery plans. If a tornado comes or a hurricane comes and knocks our building out, what are we going to do? And they have to step-by-step list that out. What I like to talk about is what are you going to do if your data is compromised? And in the healthcare world, they have to do these things. So we talk about different items you should put in there. How is the incident reported? Do you know what your notification laws are? What is your state telling you? And if you have clients or patients in multiple states, what does their state law say? Because right now, notification law is governed by the state, not federally. Congress is still trying to figure out a federal data notification in the event a company's data is breached. This is how you must notify your people. Congress is still, they're struggling with that a little bit.
Right.
So it's up to the states. Do you know what your laws are? Put that in your data breach response plan. I have to repair my image now. How am I going to do that? Do I have a PR firm on staff? Do I have my IT people on staff? How am I going to communicate it to my customers, my patients? Internally, how am I going to communicate it? And then, last thing, how am I going to fund it? In the funding part, that's where the insurance comes in. You can pay for an insurance policy, and in the event that stuff happens, a policy will kick in and pay for those expenses you incur. One, you may get sued. Community Health has got a class action lawsuit on them right now. Target had numerous ones, and you can just read the newspaper and you'll find another one next week.
You have plenty of attorneys that make their living doing that.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you may have some attorney fees. You're going to need an insurance policy to help with that. You may lose a settlement. You're going to have costs with that. You may have to hire a public relations firm to try and repair your image. Target's still trying to repair their image. And you have to notify the people by law. There's a cost to do that. There was a cost to run these articles in the paper for Community Health and the Las Vegas Review-Journal, where they're based in Alabama. So that's where the insurance component comes in.
Yeah. So, you know, if anything I get from our conversation is, number one, you want to do everything you can do to avoid the problem in the first place. Number two is sometimes it's inevitable that there's going to be a problem. Either you're going to have an employee screw something up, or you're going to have Russian mafia come in and hack in and get your system,
Yep.
you know, compromised. So, number one, try and do everything you can to avoid a problem. Number two is, when there is a problem, you got to be prepared. You got to be prepared, knowing what you're going to do internally, having things set up externally, and you know, if you can have insurance to cover it. I say the people who are providing that insurance are either had a great idea to provide a good product, or they're crazy, because you know, there's always going to be data problems that are like, the list goes on and on of things you have to pay for. So if anyone listening out there needs any assistance, or you're looking for help getting your data in place, with HIPAA, my firm, Law for Doctors, we actually offer a training program called HIPAA Training for Humans, by humans, where we get into the nitty-gritty of HIPAA and help you create the program that Matt was talking about with the 3 Ts. Also, I'm sure Matt would always be happy to sit down and talk with you and talk about your insurance and how they can help you and your business be designed and set up to avoid these problems and to address them when they inevitably occur. So Matt, is there a good way for people to get in touch with you if they'd like to do that?
Sure. We're located right here in Las Vegas. Our phone number is 702-877-1111. Easy one to remember. We've been around for 100+ years here, and you can call our office, and I'm happy to speak with you and help you any way I can.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know we also had your Twitter handle there on the show, at Matt Engle. There it is. So Twitter would be a good way too. I know we're both on there. So
Twitter works, or mattengle.com. I have a personal website where I'll do some blogs from time to time on cybersecurity and protecting your data.
all right, cool. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll hope to see you next time.